Seeing Alicia give the announcements this morning, so close to the due date now, is exciting and has me thinking, as such close friends are getting ready to have yet another child, of when my first child was born. Leland, my son, he's about to be 7 years old, which is just insane to me, but I so vividly remember the day that he was born. It was just absolutely terrifying to me. I was like one of the guys that just like, oh, that's a baby. I'll enjoy that from a distance. You hold the baby. And then I have my own, and it's not an option. Like, I have to hold the baby. I will tell you, the birthing process was incredibly traumatic. I should still talk to a counselor about it. But I so just like, it was crazy watching that. And it wasn't even me giving birth. Like, there was this pivotal moment where Leland came out, my son Leland, and there were these complications during the process, and it was like just crazy, like hours of just insanity and all this stuff, and they're telling us like he's going to be in the NICU back and forth for a while and all this stuff. But like one of the things that had to happen was the doctor said like as soon as he comes out, like we're going to have to rush him off and all this stuff, and like this is a newborn baby, but he comes out, and that doctor, it was like wrestling. Like, she just grabbed him and, like, flipped him as fast as possible and started hitting and, like, just doing all this crazy stuff. And I was like, if he lived through that, I'm good. Like, I don't need to be scared anymore. But then I did get scared because the first night, he's, like, in the NICU for a few hours, and then we come in, and so we have not slept the whole night prior. And so we're exhausted, but we have this newborn, and it's beautiful and all this stuff, and we're excited. And so we're, like, kind of dozing off. Leland's asleep in the little cradle thing they put in your room, and so Courtney's hooked up to all this stuff, has lost a ton of blood and everything, and so it's just like, it's been a day. It's time to go to sleep. And as we're like starting to fall asleep, I just hear this noise from Leland, this newborn baby. And so I jump up and I look at him, and he's turning colors. Like, he's going back to the color he was before he like started getting oxygen. Like, this is not good. He's no longer making noises. And I've been a first responder when I was a high school teacher. I'd go through the trainings and all this stuff. And so I just kind of like, I grab him, I was like, hey, the doctor did it way rougher than I'm gonna do it. And so I grab him, I flip him over, hit him, and all this stuff pops out of his mouth, and he starts breathing, color starts coming back. And at this point, you've got like nurses flying into the room, Courtney screaming, and like, it's just insanity. And I'm shaking, and they're like, good job, Dad, you knew exactly what to do. I'm like, you guys should go back to sleep. Like, I will never sleep again in my life. Like, it's not gonna happen. And he held me to that for 9 months. Like, it was rough. But here's the thing, like, I love my kids. And like, as terrifying as that was, and like, you know, parents, and I think everyone just has this kind of innate sense of what it is like the first time your child gets sick, like, it's just a cold, but you're like hovering over them, like watching for any kind of change. Like, there's something about being a parent. Like, you love your kids in a very unique way. And we know that is true. And it just begs the question, like, what would a loving parent not do to save their child? Like, what would a loving parent not do to save their kid? And that's what we need to wrestle with today as we walk through, and we're continuing in our series that this changes everything, encountering Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. And so as we've been tracking through this, we're going to jump forward into chapter 5. So if you have your copy of Scripture, we're in Mark chapter 5. We're going to be starting in verse 21. So Mark chapter 5, verse 21 is also going to be on the screen behind me. But we're jumping a little ahead, so I hope that you've been doing our reading plan so that you are kind of filling in the gaps here, but we're jumping into verse 21. After a little bit of time, remember, Jesus had, like, they're freaking out, the wind, the waves, all that stuff, and Jesus is like, peace, be still, it's all good, we're going to the other side. I said we're going to the other side, all that stuff. So they went to the other side, and now verse 21, it picks up and it says, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the sea. And so now, get the mental map in your mind. That Jesus was teaching in a boat, had this massive crowd, and so he's in the boat so that there's a little bit of separation and the natural acoustics of his voice carrying across the water and all that stuff. But he's like, hey, we're going to the other side. We don't know if that was to avoid the crowd or because he's going to minister in another area, whatever it was, but he has crossed over. And so now we jump forward, and he's going back. So imagine we're going back towards the direction that he had originally come from, where there was this huge crowd. So on the other side, while he was there, he had encountered a demon-possessed man. And so there were actually many demons. And so he did this like crazy cool thing where he cast these demons out and all this stuff. But ultimately what happened was the town was like, oh, well, yeah, we don't want you here. He's largely rejected by this region. And so he's like, all right, we're going back. And so the guy that was delivered of this oppression, this possession of these demons, he's like, Jesus, I want to come with you. I want to stay with you. Like, that's noble, right? Last week was all about the presence of God, being with God in his presence. And so this guy's like, I want to be with you. I want to be present with you. But what does Jesus tell him? Like, no, I need you to actually stay here. Go tell everyone. Like, they all just rejected me, but I want you to go tell them what I've done. How beautiful. Like, he doesn't like, okay, you reject me, and he's just like, okay, I'll have it your way. He still, in grace, leaves someone who knows his power and presence. Says, go keep sharing with them. And so now he's back in the boat, and they're coming across again. And so, verse 22, one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, my little daughter is dying. Come and lay your hands on her so she can get well and live. So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd was following and pressing against him. So the crowd is back. Seems it did not take long for that massive crowd that he needed to be in the boat so that he could speak to them is back, and they're pressing in. But this guy, Jairus, comes. And it says Jairus is a leader of a synagogue. And so in this culture at this time, the synagogue is like the place on Sabbath you'd come together, and this is kind of like a church building. You can think of it kind of like that. And so they have structured worship, all this stuff happening. And so Jesus, being like a rabbi, would be invited. Remember, we talked about one time he stands up and he speaks in this. And so this is a guy who is in charge of one of those. And so in that time, there were two officers or officials, people that were leaders in the synagogue. You have a ruler or a president, the same person, and they were in charge of like conducting worship, all the instruction, they oversee that. And then you also had the guy who was kind of like the groundskeeper. You had the administrator. The attendant is the term that they would use. And that's the person who's in charge of all the stuff that they own, like all the scrolls, the housekeeping, all that stuff. They're kind of like the business side of things. And so Jairus is one of those too. He's a leader in the synagogue, and that is significant for us to know, because as a leader of a synagogue, he would be thought of as kind of like a religious leader. Like, you're a pretty important person in this area, Jairus. And so that's significant for us to note as we start this story, because we've already seen in the Gospel of Mark leading up to this that the religious leaders don't like Jesus already. The scribes were questioning him and saying, like, he's blaspheming when he said that the paralytic's sins are forgiven. He's blaspheming. You can't say that kind of stuff. At one point, he casts out a demon, and they're like, he cast out a demon by the power of Beelzebub. Like, this guy is demonic. And that's how he's casting out demons. And you're like, that makes no sense. And so the scribes don't like him. The Pharisees, these like religious elite, they don't like him. They've like freaked out because he healed this withered man's hand on Sabbath. And they're like, you worked on the Sabbath, and your disciples, like, you're eating things that like, what is the deal with you? This is not okay. And they dislike him so much that they're actually already plotting with the Herodians to kill him. And so religious leaders overall, in general, do not like Jesus. Some so much so that they're already trying to kill him. And now here's Jairus, who would be thought to be a form of religious leader. And here comes Jairus. His daughter is dying, and he's coming to Jesus, and there's this massive crowd, and he's like, Jesus, can you please come lay hands on my daughter? She's dying. And Jesus says, yes. And they start to take off, but there's this giant crowd, and they're like, you just imagine them. They like the sweat, the noise, and everything of everybody's present. Like, everyone wants to hear Jesus, get close to him. Like, imagine, have you ever been to like a basketball game or a concert, and like the celebrity comes out, and there's like the meet and greet, and how like everyone just all of a sudden flocks in. So you imagine that kind of moment. Like, everyone wants to be close to Jesus. And Jairus is like, my daughter's dying. Like, get out of the way. We got to go. We've got to get home. Here's Jairus begging Jesus to save his daughter, a loving father. He would do anything to save his child. And we keep going. Verse 25, so imagine Jesus, like, they're coming through this crowd. They got to get here. And it says, now a woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothing. For she said, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be made well. Instantly, her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. This, put the whole thing with Jairus on pause for a moment. Jesus just got interrupted. This lady, for 12 years, has been bleeding. And we won't get too graphic, but it's pretty obvious what kind of bleeding this is. For 12 years, she is bankrupt financially. She has spent everything she has to try to stop this bleeding. And you just imagine, she's constantly feeling faint. She's disgusting, feeling there's no question, it's just gross. You don't want to live in a state of constant blood being emitted from your body. And not just financially bankrupt, she's socially bankrupt. Because we know the law says that when a woman is in that time, when a woman is bleeding, they're unclean. And so you don't touch them. You keep your distance. And so this lady for 12 years has gone to see doctor after doctor, spending everything she has, and they have not helped. And in fact, it's just gotten worse. And you remember we talked about the leper and how just the outcast and everything, and then for Jesus to touch him. Here's this lady who now for 12 years has been unclean, cut off. But here she comes to Jesus and she's like, if I can just touch his clothes, I know that I'll be made whole. If I can just touch his clothes. And so she does. Imagine her, there's this giant crowd, and the shame that she's feeling as she's kind of snaking her way through, and she's trying to get there, and so is everyone else. But this lady knows, I'm not supposed to be touching any of you. If you guys knew what's happening under these robes. And she's making her way to Jesus. And you just imagine her getting there and just reaching through people and just grasping his robe and letting go. And instantly she feels the flow of blood stop. And she knows that she's been healed. What an incredible moment for her. You can imagine the smile that just breaks out on her face. I knew it. I knew it. I knew this would happen. And I don't want you to miss the change that has happened here. That up to this point in this gospel, Jesus is the one who's proactively deciding and then actually enabling these healings. He's saying, yes, be healed. I am willing. And fever, no, it's gone. All this stuff. Jesus is the one who's proactively doing these things. And yet now there's this shift. For the first time, someone in faith has come to Jesus for healing and received healing when he did not proactively provide it. This is a huge shift. And what faith she has that this would happen. That now she's healed because she has touched the clothes of Jesus. And so watch what happens now. Verse 30. At once, Jesus realized in himself that power had gone out from him. What kind of a being is this? Remember in the boat? Wait a second. He looks like a human. What is this? He's doing what only God can do. This is Jesus, fully God and fully man. It's called the hypostatic union for you theology nerds. That he is fully God and fully man. Together, he is here. And so the limitations of his humanity that, I just felt power come out. What just happened? Fully God. That power was even in him and has now healed this lady. So he says, at once, he realized in himself that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? You just imagine that moment. Remember, she's smiling probably. I got healing. And that smile immediately. He stopped. Remember, they're going to Jairus' dying daughter. They're on a mission. They're moving and trying to get through the crowd. Everyone's pressing in because everyone wants to get close to Jesus. But this lady has snaked her way through, grabbed the hem of his robe. She's healed. Jesus, stop, turns around. Who touched me? Who touched me? His disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing against you, and yet you say, who touched me? We need to get you some food, man? What's going on? Everyone's touching you. But he was looking around to see who had done this. Jesus is looking around. Jesus is interrupted on a very important mission. He is going to save the life of this man's daughter. And everybody wants their time with Jesus. Everyone wants to be close to Jesus. But this lady makes it through, touches him. He feels power go out. She's healed. She feels it. She knows, I'm healed. And Jesus comes to a dead stop, turns around. Who touched me? And the disciples get sarcastic. They're like, everyone touched you, brother. I'm like, no. Who touched you? He's looking. And Jesus is interrupted. Even in such a critical mission as this, like how beautiful is that Jesus has time for her? Do you know that Jesus has time for you? I am the world's worst, probably. I don't know that, but I feel like it. About just going and going and going. And you're like, I gotta get stuff done, like knock stuff off the list. Like this is good, accomplish and everything. And like for me, when I have time with God, like I have to constantly come to a state of just absolute wonder before I can start anything that God would have time for me. That of the 7.5 billion people on this planet, that God cares about every single one of us. And yet he says, no, Kevin, I love you. And I have time for you. Yeah, I'm holding everything together. But I have time for you. That this lady would be coming through, receive this healing. And like, why wouldn't she just jump in his face and be like, hey, can you heal me really quick? I know you're going somewhere. She's just like, she has the humility. She's like, if I just touch his clothes. He doesn't have time for me to jump in front of him and like have dialogue and all that, but if I could just touch his clothes. And Jesus is like, no, sister, I have time for you. And he's looking, he looks at her like God sees us in our calamity, in our hurt, that God sees us. The scripture says he is close to the wounded and the weary, that he loves us. There is a special place in the heart of God for those who are hurting. Jesus has time for her. So we keep going, verse 33. The woman, now imagine how terrified, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Like, yeah, Jesus, I thought I was just gonna like reach in there, grab you, like, I won't take your time, I won't get in your way, like, that's all I'm asking for, and I won't even ask it out loud. Like, if I just touch you. But now Jesus wants to know who touched me. He has time, and now she is terrified. With fear and trembling, she falls down and she tells him the truth. What does he say? Daughter, he said to her, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction. Your faith has saved you. What saved her? Faith. The same thing that will save us. Faith. It is faith that saves. Her faith has saved her, but faith in what? It is faith in Jesus. That this lady for 12 years has gone to the pros. She's gone to the people who should be able to help, and instead they have hurt her. For 12 years. And here she is on this day with hope, with faith, with belief and trust that Jesus can heal her, that he can save her. This is convicting. How often do we have a season of doubt or wrestling or petitioning God for something, and it goes on for days or weeks or months, and we get discouraged and we give up? And here's this woman, 12 years into this, has faith. He can heal me. I'll run to Jesus, and I'll just touch his clothes. And he says, daughter, your faith has saved you. Have you given up faith when you need to persevere? Resolve in your heart and your mind that he can save, that he can change things. And don't give up on that. You keep pressing in. And what if it takes 12 years? But then you see God stop and say, I have time for you. Yeah, I see you. Don't give up. Keep praying. And it's just interesting. Why did he say her faith has saved her? Like, it's possible that this was terminal, and she's like, it's getting worse, we're told. So maybe she was about to die. I mean, it's got to be pretty bad if she felt the flow of blood stop. So maybe he's saying your faith saved you, as in like your life is literally saved. You've been spared of death right now in this immediate context. But it doesn't seem as such, because he says your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction. It's like he's separating it out. And so what is this faith actually saving her from? Like, yes, you'll have healing from your affliction, but your faith has saved you. He's speaking to something so much greater than the immediate circumstances. Remember, we've shown over and over that he's doing these miraculous things, and we should long for that. But he emphatically is making the point, that is not what this is about. This is about a greater work, that I am the redeemer of your soul. This is about everlasting life, and I care about you now in this moment. And so don't stop asking for healing and all of that. But there's so much more. And so your faith has saved you. She comes with fear and trembling and falls down before him. And is that not the posture that we should also assume before the Lord? That we would come with fear. We talked about this last week, that we should fear God. He has all power. He knows all things. We should absolutely come before him with fear and trembling, fall before him, and yet delight in him and the safety of God, who is our refuge, that he is the Lord offering forgiveness and life. So now we get back to the story of Jairus. Verse 35. While he was still speaking, so he's in his interruption, put the mission on pause, talking to this woman. While he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue leader's house and said, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Can you imagine the way that kind of news hits you? And we were on a mission. This lady came from nowhere. Jesus stopped. He's talking to her, and now people are running up and like, just leave him alone. It's too late. She died. Can you imagine the weight of that? Like, I would be doubled over throwing up if this was my daughter. Can you imagine what this moment is like for Jairus? How crazy. And there's this other side of this. So like, why are these guys coming and saying like, just don't bother the teacher anymore? Why weren't they there in the first place? And what's the deal here? Like, is this yet another thing kind of pointing at like, not everybody in Jairus' circles would have been cool with this. Like, are you only coming to Jesus because you want something? Nah, okay, let's bail. Let's get out of this. We don't know, but we really should wrestle with that. So he continues on, verse 36. When Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, don't be afraid, only believe. To hear Jesus again say, don't be afraid, only believe. Why is Jairus afraid? Well, on the smaller scale, remember, he's a religious leader, so this is probably somewhat questionable and shady for him to be doing. But more so, this is daddy. This is daddy. And he was just told that his daughter has died. So fear, yeah, to put it lightly. And what does Jesus lovingly say? Don't be afraid. Just believe. Only believe. Jairus, have faith. Believe. That is what Jesus is saying is essential here. Have faith. And so verse 37, he did not let anyone accompany him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. They came to the leader's house and he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep. Well, that sounds like good news. But these people are not stupid. They know the difference between a sleeping child and a dead child. They laughed at him. But he put them all outside. You laugh, or get out. Go outside. You don't need to be here for this. He took the child's father, mother, and those who were with him and entered the place where the child was. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha kum, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old. At this, they were utterly astounded. Then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Like, what an incredible miracle has just happened. Like, this is insane. Jairus, daddy, just heard news that his daughter had died. He's come. He's like, Jesus, can you please come? My daughter's dying. Jesus is like, yes. And then they get interrupted. While they're interrupted, other people come. They're like, she died. Too late. Leave him alone. And there's already people publicly mourning at the house because the girl has died. And Jesus is like, oh, she's not dead, she's just asleep. And they start laughing at him. They're laughing at him. And so he walks inside after kicking all of them out. Like, you don't believe? All right, get out of here. And now he's like, Talitha kum, little girl, I say to you, rise up, get up. Rise up is a direct reference to what the New Testament uses for Jesus coming up from the grave. This is resurrection power that Jesus has just shown. Not only do I have authority over demons and nature and all of your sickness, but I can raise the dead. And so it's like she's just asleep. Now she'll be back. Can you imagine what that is like for this father? That his little girl had died and now she is alive because of Jesus. That Jesus would come in. You notice Mark uses Aramaic in here. He goes back to a different language. And we even keep it in our English translations with the transliteration that's next to it and like all this stuff. Like, why would he do that? So, quick little study here. Like, most of the New Testament is Greek. It's written in Greek. And so the gospel, according to Mark, written predominantly in Greek. And yet he takes a moment here to not translate the common language, Aramaic, that they were probably all speaking for the most part here. Everything else he's translating into Greek. And now we have it in English. And yet here he stops and he's like, no, I want you to hear it in the language it was originally spoken. In counseling, this is called a verbatim. That if you experience something and you really need to go through and process that, then the counselor's like, I need to hear everything exactly as it was. Tell me what the room looked like. Tell me every sound, every feeling, every bit of it, verbatim. Let me hear it from your mouth. And you do that because there's something significant there that needs to be drawn out. There's something seismic happening here. This only happens a handful of times in this gospel where Mark goes back to Aramaic and is like, look, this hit so hard that I can't even translate it for you. You just got to hear it. How this is insane. Jesus walks in the room. The girl's dead. Everyone's like, she's dead. And he's like, Talitha kum, little girl, I say to you, rise up. And she got up. She's alive. Like, imagine how this hit Peter as he's telling Mark and like just all the disciples when they would relive this. Like, you would not believe what this was like. This is insane. Oh, what beauty. But Talitha is also this term of gentle endearment. Like, there's not a more fatherly way for Jesus to address this daughter. A little girl. Like, I imagine my little Elena running around like a crazy person. And the way that my heart feels for her, just imagine Jesus and his heart feeling for her. He's like, hey, give her something to eat. She's hungry. He cares about her. Do you know that is how Jesus comes to us? You. That Jesus comes to you with that kind of endearment, offering us resurrecting life, forgiveness, freedom for all of eternity, to live with him. He uses that kind of a term. And I don't want you to miss how connected these things are, because it seems like this weird interruption. Like, Mark, you probably could have saved us like a little bit of weirdness of just like, make them separate stories. Make them separate stories. Like, okay, this cool thing happened with this lady who has been bleeding for a long time. This cool thing happened with this little girl who died and you raised her from the dead. But he puts them together. And that's on purpose. And I want you to see the beauty of this, how connected these two are. How old is this little girl? She is 12. And how long has this woman been bleeding? For 12 years. And what does Jesus say to the woman as she is healed? Daughter, your faith has saved you. I'm on the way to bring life to this man's daughter. And I stop because I have time for you, daughter. This is the point, that faith makes us daughters and sons of the King of the cosmos. That faith brings us into the family of God. That faith brings life everlasting. This is what faith does. It makes us daughters and sons of God. My kids love playing out in the neighborhood with other neighborhood kids. And the kid who lives right next door to us, he's a little bit younger than my son. And he comes out, and we'll always play, and he's Hispanic, and so he calls his father Papi. And that's all he has ever known his dad as. And so when he hears my son and my daughter talking to me, and they call me daddy or dad, that's all he hears me as. And so I'll never forget the first time that he comes up to me and he starts talking to me. He's like, hey, daddy, can I do this and this and this? I'm like, what just happened? This kid just called me daddy. Like, I'm not your daddy, man. What's the thing? Daddy is more than a name. Daughter is more than a name. It's not just a reference, it's a relationship that Jesus has shown us. Like, you don't see much father language in the Old Testament or mother language, it's there. But Jesus comes and he's emphatically like, look, this is how you relate to God in heaven. It's Father. You've been made sons and daughters by faith. Faith in the one who came to save us. Because the healing of this bleeding woman was not about her living the rest of her life no longer bleeding. And this little girl raised from the dead was not about her just having a longer life. She's dead. She's not around anymore. It's about so much more. It's about coming into the family of God and the importance of faith and that you are not a part of the family of God outside of faith. You must believe, and you must believe in Jesus because Jesus is the one. This is about his greater redemptive work, that Jesus would come and he would save. The raising of this daughter points to a greater resurrection. That there is another child who would come, and another child who would die, and another child who would be raised from the dead to life forevermore. And that child is the child of God, the Son of God, Jesus Christ. That he would come, so if we would put our faith in him, we too will be raised to everlasting life. And we can experience that now, to be with him, to know with certainty. It's faith. And so there's going to be an element of doubt. Otherwise, it's not faith. And so don't kill yourself over your doubts. Instead, just grow your faith and ask God to grow your faith, because this is what faith brings, is life and freedom, full forgiveness and love from God. That he loves you, church. He loves you, beloved. He has all authority. And as I close, I just want to point this out, that it hit me. Verse 40, they show up, the daughter has died, and Jesus is like, hey, stop all the commotion. She's just asleep. I'm going to go wake her up. And what do? They start laughing. They start ridiculing him. Why? They don't believe him. They don't believe him. And so what does Jesus do? He puts them outside. You don't have faith? You don't get to see resurrection power. You want to see resurrection power? Well, it requires faith. And that's not like a guilt-driven thing. That's a beautiful invitation from a gracious God to believe in me. Come on inside. Watch this. Look what I'll do in your life, in your heart. Look what I'll do in your marriage. Look what I'll do in this world through you because of my love and grace toward you. And it's all leading to one day, the day that we've been sealed with a promise for, that he who began a good work in us will complete it. So put your faith in Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your great love. I thank you that I guess it would have been enough for you to just come and live a sinless life that we could not, and die the death that we deserve and be raised to life. But you did so much more, Jesus. Because of your grace and your love for us, you have emphatically shown us with all of these stories that John's gospel ends saying that we couldn't even keep them all in a book if we were to write them all down. You prove over and over and over you have the power and you love us, you're for us. So God, we love you, we submit to you, grow our faith. Help us, Jesus, to know you, the power of your resurrection. And it's all for your glory that we pray these things. In Jesus' name.